Welcome everybody to the Changelogs webinar with KitchDesigner and Revit. Today's webinar is going to focus on specifically just one tool on the KitchDesigner ribbon, the Design Narratives tool. And the Design Narratives tool will allow us to create changelogs between 2 points in time in our Revit project. And points in time are referred to as snapshots in the Design Narrative tool. And to create a new snapshot, we just use this plus button right here. And what that does is it creates a data snapshot of all of the equipment and all of the parameters, locations, item numbers, descriptions, model numbers, the whole 9 yards of all the equipment in our current design. And using this data snapshot, we'll compare it with another data snapshot and then create a design narrative, which in turn we can create a changelog from that will export to Microsoft Word. So one of the first questions we get is we can create snapshots for our current project using this plus button, inside of our current project. But what if I wanted to retrieve a snapshot from a previous version of this same design, maybe the last iteration of this design? And you can do that also using these export and import snapshot buttons. But to do that, we need to open up that previous Revit file and create a snapshot there, and then export it, and then come back to this file and then import it back in. So let's do that now. So we'll close the Design Narrative tool and we'll close this version of our Revit project. And we will open up a past version that I have here. And while it's going to be a little difficult for you to see all the changes in the two versions, I'll point some of them out for you. So one of them is this whole serving counter, or it's really a convenience area for the school. This is not in the scope at this time, so this isn't drawn in. We're missing a mop sink and all the accessories that go with it over here. In this version, we have 2 less cashier counters, so those 2 were right here. There's a hand sink and some of the soap and paper towel that was over here. And some of the cooking equipment has been moved around, and just a lot of the extra countertop accessories are not in this design. So to create our changelog between this version of the design and our current version, remember, we're going to go to the Design Narrative tool, and we're going to create a snapshot, which, delete this one out, create a snapshot. And now that we have this snapshot, we can select it and export it. And it'll just prompt us to save it. We'll just save it to our hard drive, and we'll go retrieve it in the next version. So let's click save. Now that we have our snapshot, we can press close, and we can exit out of this version of the design. The Design Narrative tool, and specifically when you're creating snapshots, you are required to only have one version of Revit open. Or not one version of Revit, but really one Revit project open. And that's just because when we create that data file, it's impossible for us to create a file when multiple versions are open. We need only one version to be open to create that snapshot. So now we're going to go back to our current version of the design, where I'll point out the changes again. We've added this counter and some of the equipment that goes on top of it. We've filled this out with more countertop equipment. This piece of shelving was added. This mop sink area was added. Some of this countertop equipment was added. The cook line's been rearranged a bit. This hand sink was required, and these cashier counters. So that's just about, maybe some other missing shelving as well. So now let's go to our Design Narrative tool. And because I never saved, that snapshot wasn't there. So let's just create a current snapshot, just so I can show you how these funnel in when you import them. And there's one thing here, when you close this file and you save Revit, all of the snapshots that you've created will now be saved to the Revit file. So you could exchange this Revit file to somebody else in the company, or it could just be staying in there forever, and just keep an active log of all the snapshots that you've created over time. You don't have to worry about exporting them out to save them after you create them. So open up our Design Narrative tool. Here's the current snapshot of this file, and what we want to do is import our previous snapshot in. So let's click import. Let's navigate to the previous version. and press open. And I'm not sure if you've noticed that, but you can see the previous version was actually created before. And as you can see, they funnel in based on time and date. So they're always going to be in chronological order based on when they were created. So we now have these two snapshots, one from the previous version of the design and one from the current version. And using these two snapshots, if we select just two of them, we can compare these two together and create a design narrative. So what we have to do is select two and only two, and then come down here and press this button, this plus sign, to create the design narrative file. It happens just about instantly. We can change this to schematic design. And now this file that was created right here, it's just another data file. It's not easy to read. It's just really a bunch of data being compared and being sorted out to see the changes. So to understand or to visualize this, we can select our design narrative, and then we can select this button here to export the design narrative to Microsoft Word. There's two choices here, connection and rough-in. We'll go over this just a little bit later here. But for now, we're just going to keep it on connection, which is the simpler version of the changelog. And so we'll press this button. And here is the changelog that is populated. So as you can see up top here, this title is just given based on the type of changelog we created. This was a connection report. Here, project name, address, and number are project information parameters in Revit that you can fill in, or that usually are populated in your title block or things like that, just to give you a header. And these are some more technical versions of the before snapshot and the after snapshot, just to have some things in there for tracking. So you could certainly delete all this stuff off. Doesn't matter, kind of clean this up a bit. And now, if you look down here, you'll see all of the changes that were collected. The design narrative really works in three different ways. It finds stuff that were added, it finds stuff that were deleted, and it finds stuff that were changed. And along with those three different ways, the added and deleted will show all of the MEP parameters that were added and deleted, and even the changed will show things that have moved, as well as other things such as descriptions that may have changed, or manufacturers and model numbers that have changed, or maybe just manufacturers or just model numbers that changed. And so with this snapshot, you can see all of the changes that have been made between the two versions have been picked up here in this very nice to easy to read exchangeable document that you can now pass around to give along with your updated design, so that the engineers and architects can also understand what changes occurred in the food service design. So if you look in here, you'll see that this is the volts parameter, this is the cycle parameter, this is phase, this is FL amps, this is electric connection type, and this is connection plug, which usually kind of houses the NEMA. For plumbing, you know, this cold water size, hot water size, this is direct waste size, and it picks up some others too. Indirect waste size, I didn't see it in this list, but we'll see it here shortly probably. So this is a design narrative changelog that we created using the design narrative tool. And so this was just a simple version based on two schematic designs, one that was further developed and showing all the differences in the two. So now let's go back and let's try this with MEP and with rough-ins. So before I do that, let me show you a couple things that you can see. So project information parameters are on the Manage tab. If you click project information, it's a little bigger. These three parameters are the ones that, these are the parameters that are showing up in that header. So I'm going to just add some stuff in there just so that you see that next. And also wanted to show you the design narrative settings. Design narrative has its own tab in settings, and in here you can actually control some of the stuff that gets printed out. So if we don't want to show that header section, we can just uncheck it here. If we want to not show things that have been moved, if certain things have been nudged around, they may only be moved an inch or two, we can control those things with this move tolerance. This is saying if something moves, it's only picked up if it moves more than 6 inches. But you can also just turn off all the moved elements if you don't want to show anything that's been moved in the design narrative changelog. So let's put this on. We'll click save here. And if you haven't used KitchDesigner, seen these webinars, all of the settings in here save to the Revit file, just like the snapshot saved to in the design narrative. So as long as you just click save here and save Revit, all of your settings will always be saved to the Revit file, the Revit project file. So now we're going to explore a more advanced version of this changelog, and basically we're going to place some rough-ins and show what happens when changes to rough-ins occur. So to do this, let's first, well, actually what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the previous version, and I'm going to create rough-ins in that version, and then we're going to show the new version with rough-ins and show the changelog when we actually had rough-ins placed, which can just be more elaborate and kind of show the stuff that the engineer needs to be aware of. So let's first open up our previous version, because we're going to need the snapshot from the previous version. So let's close this. We'll go back to our previous version. This time I have a version here with all the MEP already added into it, which I can show you. So this is the same before version that we created this design narrative changelog from, but on this one, I've actually went through the process of just adding the rough-ins. So I didn't actually tag them, but we can tag them right now. And tags aren't picked up in the design narrative tool, so you don't need to worry about those for this. But you can see here, I just have all the rough-ins, junction boxes, receptacles placed. If you haven't seen any of our MEP stuff, these are all, real 3D objects that were placed. I don't have the background linked in, but, and so, actually I do. So with this, let's say, this is a common thing that happens. Let's say, the architect said that the design was fleshed out and it was completely done and it was ready to move on to engineering, and they needed you guys to do the rough-ins. And so you went ahead and placed all the rough-ins in this design. And then the architect comes back and said, oh, sorry, we actually need some more equipment or need some more changes to the design. Can you please make the changes to the design? And at the same time, can you please also update the rough-in plans? So that's what we're going to show here. This is our previous design that we already did the rough-ins on. And we're going to then compare this to our current version of the design that we've also done the rough-ins on. So to start, I'm going to go to the design narrative tool. Here's that snapshot we created previously, actually, the one that was saved. But and so we're going to create another snapshot, and then again we're going to just export this snapshot. And these two buttons don't matter for this. It's still collecting rough-ins and specialty equipment data in all the snapshots. It doesn't matter if this is selected. This is just to show what gets compared and what gets printed out in the changelog. So here's our before MEP rough-in snapshot, and we're going to export that just like before. And now we can close, and that'll be our before snapshot. And so let's go back to our after, or our current design. And we'll go up to our design narrative tool. And here's the snapshot we had created. We created earlier. So now let's actually, yeah, so let's bring in our rough-in snapshot, which was at 219, that's correct. And now let's place some rough-ins in this one. All right, so we just placed our electrical rough-ins. Obviously, if you had placed these in the before snapshot, you'd only be placing the ones that changed. But for this demo, it doesn't so much matter. We placed our plumbing rough-ins. And so now let's compare with rough-ins. So let's go back to our design narrative tool, and we're going to create a snapshot. And so now our 219 was our previous design with rough-ins. and our 221 is our current design with rough-ins. So now again, we're going to select our 2 snapshots and press the plus sign to create our design narrative. And this is going to be all right, so name that so that we know what we're talking about here. And again, if I would have saved this project after I'd created that previous design narrative, it would still be shown in here. And so now we are going to use this rough-in toggle, and this you'll see it's just going to print out a more elaborate changelog. It's still going to have everything that the connection changelog had. It's also just going to add in the information on the electric outlets that changed, or the plumbing outlet or plumbing valves that changed, and so forth in terms of the rough-in families. So now again, select the design narrative and click open to open up Microsoft Word. All right, and I didn't save this, so this didn't populate, but that's okay, we'll share that again. And so here again, this is gonna look identical because the same equipment changed in both the before and after. But if you scroll down, now we're also gonna have separate categories or separate sections for electrical rough-in changes and plumbing rough-in changes. So you can see here, we added a bunch of step-up junction boxes. These were actually for our cashier counters. Again, we added 61, another junction box. We added some receptacles. This is for our countertop equipment in that convenience area. And I think this was for a food processor or blender or something like that. And so in the plumbing, this is all the stuff we added for our hand sink right here, which would be the hot and cold for the faucet and the direct waste for this hand sink. And then this would be our mop sink here, the stub up direct waste and the hot and cold for the mop sink faucet. And I think this is for a mop soap dispenser. So this is how you would show rough-in changes using the design narrative tool as well. So those are the 2 different ways to use the design narrative tool. And the last thing I wanted to go over is just, what is the difference between, a rough-in and a connection report? And so really the main difference is in that separate electrical rough-in section, it's picking up different family categories. So, all of the equipment here is specialty equipment. Sometimes it may be casework, but all of the rough-ins are picking up different categories. So electrical rough-ins are electrical fixtures, or they can be all these categories shown here: electrical fixtures, electrical equipment, data devices, conduit fittings. For plumbing, very similar idea. All the specialty equipment is all the food service equipment, and the rough-ins are plumbing fixtures, or they can also be pipe fittings or pipe accessories. And again, these are just different categories of families in Revit that we use for our rough-ins so that they only show up on certain views. And also, using plumbing fixtures and electrical fixtures are great categories to use because MEP engineers will also receive your rough-in symbols in the correct way, because those are categories that they also use and have turned on in their Revit views. So that is it for the changelogs webinar with KitchDesigner and Revit. If you guys have any questions, please use the Q&A button, and thank you guys for joining.